Mike and I go back almost 30 plus years. Mike is an incredible CEO, an innovator, dynamic leader, and really one of the smartest tech people on this planet. You will see him keynoting at major speeches on major stages. You can find his TED Talks online. You can find things that he's written. There's multiple websites that feature the work of Mike Hruska, particularly around the way people think and learn. And you're going to hear this concept that I believe is so important to executives and leaders today, and that is augmented organizations and augmented individuals that are actively augmented with AI in order to do work that could not be done by the AI itself and cannot be done by the human themselves. This is a convergence. This is a joining of things together. We even talk a little bit about the tetrayation in here, and some of my personal friends and thinkers that we get together, I've started talking about the tetrayation, and I think we'll explain it a little bit more in this episode. And I'll talk about tetrayation as we move forward and about how the tetrayation, I think it's far, far into the future, but how the probability of tetrayation in our society is becoming more and more probable every day. All right, here we go. This is part one. We're going to break Mike into a couple episodes. So part one of Mike Hruska. Craig, I'm not sure we're going to break these up now that I think about it. If you have to, we can break that out of there. Let me do another one real quick here, just because let me try to get the last end of that. So this interview with Mike is really one of my favorites, and I hope you'll enjoy it. I know it's a little bit lengthier episode than we're used to here at the Convergence, but I've got to tell you, as the show has started to really get the numbers, there's 60,000 people that are listening to this show a month now. As this show has started to really get the numbers, I'm getting a higher level of guests that's reaching out and wanting to be on the show. So we're going to try to start doing a little bit of extended versions. We'll do some deep cuts that maybe don't make it onto the show, but it'll be over on our YouTube channel. But really enjoy this time with Mike. He's a brilliant mind. He is a brilliant strategist. He is developing some of the world's top AIs right now. Some he talked about on the show. Some, he just can't. They're just too, they're not able to come out into the marketplace yet. We'll just say that. So enjoy this interview with Mike Hruska. Hey, welcome back to another edition of the Convergence. I'm excited today to have another old friend. It feels like this is the month of old friends. Mike Hruska, we grew up together. We were in the music scene together way back when we were still, I guess I was in, how old were you, Mike, when you started in Bad Wrench? I mean, what?
I like 16.
I was going to say, I think I was about 18 or 19 playing in other bands. Mike and I both grew up in central Pennsylvania, in a little town called Johnstown. He has returned. You have returned to the Valley. Triumphant return to the Valley. I'm still leaving it out here in Arizona. But Mike, it's great to have you on the show. I was so excited to find, I knew that you were a technology guy. I was so excited to find in the last few weeks that you are an AI guy as well. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your background, your companies, and then we can start to talk a little bit about how AI is influenced the tech field right now.
That sounds awesome. It's great to be with you. I love geeking out with you on stuff, and I'm excited
Likewise.
to share some things. Our last session, I wish we could have gone for like 9 hours, but I
know it's like especially when we do these later in the evening ones for you, East Coast, and I'm like, oh man, I feel bad. It's like 11 o'clock and we're still BSing. So
it's all good. But I'm really obsessed with technology. If you read What Technology Wants by Kevin Kelly, he posits that technology is another animal kingdom, and it just wants to connect us more to each other and more to it. And so as I'm looking at what is emerging around any time, whether it's the introduction of the steam engine or electricity or telephone lines or internet or mobile, those are kind of like mudslide or avalanche or landslide moments in time. They kind of happen. There was some momentum associated with them, but they rolled out slow because you had to roll out infrastructure. As I've looked at technology my whole life and spent a number of years at the National Institute of Standards and Technology studying innovation and technology emergence, what's going on right now is an avalanche in every dimension exponentially because all the infrastructure is there. All the delivery modality is there. And so this is probably the most exciting time. I feel like an 8-year-old kid in the environment that's kind of forming around us. It's just absolutely amazing.
I love that you mentioned the word exponential because a regular guest in the show is Aaron Bear. Aaron has written Exponential Theory, and he actually wrote the foreword for my new book that's dropping today called Adapt Agility. And Aaron and I were together about 2 weeks ago, and we were chatting about this concept of exponential. And I think I blew his mind because I said, there's something beyond exponential. Exponential is growing in a trajectory forward. Tetrayation is growing in every direction simultaneously in every dimension. And I could see in his head, he was like, I'm gonna have to write another book, because we're coming to a tetrayation where it's not just forward, it's all directions simultaneously. And I think that's the exciting point about I love what you said about mudslide versus avalanche. I think it's very different what we're seeing today. And I think the impact on business is at a totally different level. Like you cannot be thinking about this like, oh, we're going to have to build a website. It's not like that. It's different.
It is absolutely different. And it was you. I just didn't have the word tetrayation.
Tetrayation. It's a mathematical name. And I gotta like go buy tetrayation.com. I'm going to do that while you're talking.
All right. Fantastic. No, I mean, so if you think about, you can kind of think about this as any other technology explosion on the earth was kind of a regular type of kinetic, not a nuclear kinetic. A nuclear kinetic has a mushroom cloud and rolls over on itself. There's a ton of churn. There's atmospheric implications at the center point and all around, but ultimately it washes over the earth. I mean, the way I described it to people is when ChatGPT 3 was released, it's as if the entire earth, not a flat earth person, but just take this for a second, was rolled out onto a mat and everything got a fine layer of ice on it with the best lubricant ever and tilted forward towards the future. And the challenge is it's nearly impossible to predict the future. You can predict many futures. So all we can do is take the next step. And I think that's like the one critical message for people. Just do it. Just take the next step, whatever it is.
That is that's a really interesting point that you make that, I think when you think about an avalanche, you can predict where it's going, right? If you're standing downhill from it, you can predict where it's going. It's almost more, where the ground underneath us is being shaken right now to a point that we really don't know what the landscape is going to look like on the other end of this thing. And I think that is scary because let's be honest, as business owners, we are always trying to predict. We're trying to skate where the puck is going, not where it's been. And now, unfortunately, the puck has left the ice and it's rolling out into the parking lot, and we've got to sort of figure this thing out. The laws of physics against that item are different today than they were before. Mike, why don't you talk a little bit about where your business is? Because you've been a technologist and a futurist now for a period of time, particularly around human learning. How is AI affecting that, and where do you see this going? Although I know none of us can predict. What's your best guess?
Yeah, I mean, back in like 2006 and 2007, put a group of folks together to kind of think about the future of learning and human performance, adaptive systems, saying that we're going to get ubiquitous connectivity. Mobile's going to become much more of a modality for consumption and delivery and interface. It'll become your remote control, like Carnegie Mellon University folks say. But we developed something called the Experience API. If you know e-learning, there was a standard, essentially the MP3 standard for e-learning called SCORM. Worked with the folks that had that out of the Pentagon, developed this idea of Experience API, which is essentially would evidence an interaction between a person and another person or a person in the system. So active, verb, object, context, result, extensions. So the idea is—
Say that one more time. Active, verb, context, result, extension.
Actor, verb, object.
Actor, verb.
Actor, verb, object. Derrick read this book. Mike watched this movie. Or actor, verb, context, results, extensions. Active, verb, object, context, results, extensions.
I'm going to write. I love this because actor, verb. I love things. I always say this phrase. And yesterday I was in an executive meeting and I said it, and they were like, write it on the board. Automate, outsource, abbreviate, eliminate. I say it all the time. We have to automate, outsource, abbreviate, eliminate. And they're like, that's what we need. Write that thing right there. So again, actor, object,
verb, object, context, result, and extensions. So theoretically, you could describe very little things. I call this the idea of little brother. And so this was released as a DoD spec and is now becoming an IEEE standard. Not that it's prescriptive to what we're doing in AI, but we did it because we saw what the advances in AI could do in education. There have been longstanding goals related to intelligent tutoring and intelligent systems, adaptive systems. So the concept was it's never going to work without the data. We're going to have the right data. The data is going to need to be structured and unstructured in some way. So it's a JSON-based specification, but there's a ton of uptake in learning and learning systems market. And so things that we've been working on are taking data from learning and human performance systems and data from ERP and CRM systems and moving those into data lakes and running AI machine learning against that to help identify where activities could lead to insights for process improvement and bottlenecks in some ways. We've been doing that stuff for years, but where the edge of the wave is just uber interesting because I've seen a number of organizations, large organizations, ban the use of ChatGPT. However, a language model could be insanely useful for a company. And, we'll give the IT team the benefit of the doubt saying it's insecure. We need to do it so that it is secure. But with the proliferation of all the different types of species and genus types, like that AI Daddy had his list of 600 plus tools.
It's crazy, right? Yeah.
Look at the categories. Those are the genus types of the future for the animal.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah, to connect Kevin Kelly's work to his. Yeah. And then you can see the species of different types of variation in the genus there. Super interesting. So what are going to be the next emergent genus types? Genotypes. Yeah.
Ooh.
We got to jam on that.
And is that theorem proving? Is that where do you think that next genus type? I mean, I think that's one of the few that's sort of left, right? I mean, the theorem proving concept of being able to take AI, feed it research data, and it predict the date that we'll have a vaccine for cancer, right? I mean, those kind of things I think are what the future of AI, at least from a researcher's perspective, that we all hope that we're going to, that it isn't just generative, but it actually becomes predictive in its ability to say, and listen, I mean, there's lots of predictions in this world. I have a Galton board sitting on my desk that I turn often and I show this is standard deviation. This is how things work. Is that what you're thinking? Is that what are the final frontiers, I guess? This is a good question. I wrote a poem here recently, and I'm going to screw it up, but it is AI never in art nor prose with pen, yet these things first shivered the last we thought for us, right? The things that we said AI could never do. Oh, it'll never write content. Geez, it'll never do art and music. Well, guess what? Those are the first ones that it sort of knocked off. So how do we predict where these next genus types occur? And what are your hopes for that?
Yeah, so I'll flip over to the other side. So right now, technology emergence has shown us what is possible. And so if you think about an organization that desires to use AI inside the organization, let's call that someone that has an aspiration to be an augmented enterprise. So they want to be able to augment their enterprise's intelligence at one or more levels. So you can think it like this sort of superficial level. I'm going to partner AI with one single person, and they're going to be a creative thought partner. Microsoft's going to do this, with Copilot. They're going to roll this out. Google's going to have their own version of that. You might think at the top level of the organization, there might be AI that is constantly patrolling data that's reporting into the executive leadership team, giving them ideas for insights and actions. And then you might think in the meso layers of this about the concept of augmented intelligence teams. These are two or more people that are coupled with AI as a thought partner, an accountability partner, an ideation partner, a scribe, whatever that might be. And so, as I'm looking at this, I'm looking at the design patterns for right now. A lot of people are learning what's possible, and a lot of people are playing and being playful. If we think about the frame of an augmented enterprise, there's all the way up to the enterprise, all the way down to the individual and augmented intelligence teams in between. But the other thing that's going to be really interesting is thinking about something more global, like a supply chain. Why wouldn't a supply chain that me and you and 20 other people participate in, why wouldn't we expose our data in some ways? I know XML had the promise of this a long time ago. So it sounds too good to be true, but it's actually quite possible here, moving forward. So I think
it's a matter of trust, right? You have the trust, I think, was always the problem there. There has to be a trusted third party that is somewhat decentralized. And I think that goes back to the Web3 sort of conversation around decentralization, because trust is the commodity that we have the least of, particularly as AI, I think, rolls out. So creating those trusted networks are really important.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the balance here is going to come like in the pendulum metaphor. What's possible is being built faster than you can believe it. What people need is going to be prototyped pretty fast. And then the emergent needs are going to be kind of understood by organizations. And there's either going to be tooling that makes sense for them to buy, or they're going to have to build their own. That's germane to their business. Most businesses run on software that can just be built, but there are some businesses that are inordinately complex, unique, with incredibly interesting business rules, where they may have to build their own thing for privacy, for security reasons, because they want something tougher. As an example, we're building some things for customers that take all the context of all their meetings and pull those into a model, and then have a digital advisory bot that talks to the senior leadership, helps understand their perspective on the business, their perspective on their relationship with the business, and problems that they're trying to solve. Technically, this creates a cultural semantic topology of, are we working on the stuff that we should be working on? Are we thinking about the things that we were thinking about? And that's where that organizational level AI starts to come in to say, these are the problems that have been identified by leadership, and these are the things that people are talking about. We just don't have alignment. We're not getting the rubber to the road. So there are a lot of examples where you can have some simple things. It's great that you have Zoom, but having all your meetings on Zoom, and extending the capabilities and the context from those meetings and connecting into the corporate context, that's where we really start to unlock the idea of collective intelligence.
Okay, that's incredible, because as somebody who's a consultant, right, and advises companies, and I've sat in multiple board meetings this past week, advising organizations, I'm trying to operate as a sort of augmented executive, in the sense that I'm using not just my experience with that company, but my experience with over 100 companies to try to bring in a different perspective to the teams. And I always feel like I have critical roles in those companies, because I tend to say the things that nobody else will say or is capable of saying, because they're not aware of it. But I also think I tend to be the guy that says things that people won't say, because it affects their income, their position, their status, those kind of things. So what you're talking about here is essentially creating a virtual augmented executive that can identify patterns and trends inside the organization, and can create actionable rocks, let's use the EOS term, for the organization that they can't technically see on their own, solely because their purview is not broad enough. Is that a good summary of what you just said?
Yeah. So blind spots and faulty causal models are super challenging in organizations.
Well, I like that word, faulty causal models. I'm going to be registering 100 domain names. Anytime I hear cool words, I always go, faulty causal models. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, an example fallacy there. Oh, we need more business. All right, how do we get business? Well, we write proposals and we win them. All right, let's write more proposals. Right?
Right. Yeah, that's not a good. I mean, I just was in a meeting yesterday with this, and we talked about let's actually work on the right customer. Let's not focus on getting more activity. Let's focus on higher quality activity with the right people. Yeah. And the right people sometimes are not what you think. I worked with a large organization almost 20 years ago now. We were at a couple $100 million. That organization is now almost $5 billion. And how they got there was by trying to identify who the right customer was. And they found that right customer was very different from what we hunted for. They were much smaller. They were much easier to attain. They had higher margins. They looked on paper like you couldn't get to the destination with there, but each one of them was an individual Lego block that built a foundation of an organization that now is a multi-billion-dollar corporation. So obviously we did something right. And I think many times we focus on the wrong things, because we all want to hunt elephants when it comes to corporate America. But let me tell you, if there's no elephants in your area, you're not going to bag anything. And I think that's what you're saying. So I love that. Where does that? How far out is that, and what is the application of that? I guess inside organizations, what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, just to add two things to maybe segue
Please.
into that. So, the two fundamental design patterns. I've studied collective intelligence. MIT Center for Collective Intelligence is amazing, has a ton of resources. Peter
Mhm.
Gore and Fishback and all the folks there are doing some very cool things. I kind of stumbled on this area at NIST back in applying geophysical techniques to understand complex systems that you couldn't directly observe. And so there's some fascinating models for collective intelligence. But the two fundamental things to get outside the math to understand for design patterns in the organization are knowledge flows and learning loops. There are places where if you have the right combination of people, you will create new knowledge flows. The question is, how do you find those places? How do you nurture those places? And how do you amplify that knowledge? The other side of that is certain people in the organization need to learn about that information and need to be maybe just to be situationally aware of that. Some of them might need to embody it into a new behavior or new practice or thinking or abilities. These are the two, I'll say, glide paths, if you think chutes and ladders, that an organization that's really thoughtful about this is going to be able to move much faster. There's some work out there in process asset modeling. If you think about a business, every business has a set of discrete processes, maybe some macro processes as well. They all consume some assets and they all produce some assets. And so when
Yeah, we
thinking,
talk about this inputs and outputs of systems, and I think the problem is, Mike, I didn't want to interrupt your flow, but it's funny because I just gave a speech yesterday to a bunch of CEOs, and I said you have to understand there's inputs of systems, there's outputs of systems, there's outcomes. Where the true money is to be made, not revenue, but bottom line margin, is understanding the throughput of the systems and getting into the microseconds of how long it takes for somebody to answer a phone and all of these kind of things. Because when you take that over tens or hundreds of thousands of employees, seconds equals minutes, minutes equals hours, hours equals full-time employees. So you've got to have the observation of that data. And the observation of that data can be very tricky. That's why we get involved in companies and we come in with freaking stopwatches. And we go, okay, that takes this long. This takes this long. Brown, who you introduced me to, all day long, this is what Brown does, is timing processes in order to find an efficiency in them and figure out how to shave fractions of seconds off of them in order to obtain, going back to the exponential, bottom line results. I think we miss that piece, and it requires. I told somebody just yesterday, we found a 3-second fix for a company that saved them over $1 million. It took 60 hours of physical observation with human beings. That is expensive because that wasn't cheap to find that 3-second fix. It costs about $50,000 to find a 3-second fix. I think what you're saying there is maybe we can automate some of that piece of that throughput and observe with machines to come up with better solutions.
absolutely. The thing is, there's so many use cases. That's one of the challenges. There's so many possible use cases in organizations. So when we're thinking about how do they move fast, because there's an innovation propensity. Some organizations like just start building stuff, build POCs, let's measure them, let's go. And some organizations think we need to have a plan, we need to have a vision, we need to have governance. And so in terms of that, either way, we're doing AI readiness work to look at data, look at governance, doing very fast sprints so that we don't run into roadblocks and boulders and landmines. And, it's not a Coyote and Roadrunner situation later. We want to be able to move fast. So the biggest problem is with data, but with some of the advances that we have made just since January 1st, training, fine tuning, doing embeddings and other things to make a great model that has high utility and good efficiency is something that we're doing super fast. I didn't think we'd be doing it as fast as we were 90 days ago.
So right now that's relatively focused in the e-learning because that's your expertise, right? I mean, is that where you're focusing the attention?
It's really, if you really think about it in terms of knowledge management. So I'll give you a range of solutions. Organization that has a ton of technical documentation they use internally that needs to make sure that their SDK and API documentation is highly linked, highly efficient and effective, and also able to generate code samples in conjunction. So solving something like that, doing the same thing on the outside of an organization for their customer facing documentation, for them to extend the API and SDK content and tools, allowing them to set their goals and other things through interactions, and then developing code samples that are relative to their tech stack and their environment as well. So those are, more tech knowledge flows. That's a partner that's both a knowledge flow and a learning loop that someone can apply into their work. We have a very large Fortune 500 customer that we just ate all of their SOPs and have a new sort of beautiful meta-human interface that also gives you textual support associated with it. And these things are just moving fast. So there's so many different use cases.
Let's talk about this idea of structured data and data lakes here for a moment, because I do think, a lot of the speaking engagements, and I've been booking like crazy ever since this emergence of AI and I started talking about it on this podcast. But I think every executive wants to understand what's on the horizon, what's real and what isn't, what are mechanical Turks, what are actually just people pulling levers. And I think some of the AI companies that are out there right now they're not really AI companies. They might have a chat GPT backend. They don't, all they're doing is just, they're just learning how to query properly. And some of them I think are mechanical Turks in the sense that there are actually people pulling levers behind the scenes that are making it appear like it's AI. I think it's the Wizard of Oz example of the man behind the curtain. But as companies look at this and try to understand the landscape and look at their data, I think this is the one thing about AI that's very different from other disruptions. In the past, the small could defeat the big, and the fast could defeat the slow because they were more agile. Today, the big have the structured data and the access to these massive data lakes, which I believe gives them a really almost an unfair advantage. So if I'm a CEO out there and I don't have structured data, or I have divergence of systems, am I in trouble? Like, what is that? The first thing I need to focus on is getting my data into a central repository, making sure I have SOPs. Listen, I work with $1 billion companies that don't have SOPs. So where do we go from here? I know that was a lot I just put into that one thing, but how do we get there? What's the first step in getting there to try to compete?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I'll take the opposite end of what I think the answer is. Okay. If you want a language model that behaves just like your organization and can help you do everything, then you would eat all the context in your organization. You would eat your emails, you'd eat your Slack channels, you'd eat all that stuff. Yep. I don't think that someone wants that. I think that you want certain types of information to be trained associated with it. So there's what your organization is today. And then the second element is what's the emergence of your organization going forward? Where do the new knowledge flows come from that we're going to put back into our language model that's trained and tuned and private and secure just for us? That's the whole element of data change readiness is let's look at all the data. Let's look at what you need out of the gate to train whatever model that's going to be a POC and not training it on everything. And then incrementally, and I'll say train broadly to imply fine-tuning, embedding, other things, tuning the system.
Yeah. But that does mean that if I don't have SOPs right now, and we have a client we've been working with for maybe a couple of years now that has a real challenge in that they're an older industry. They have legacy data. There's legacy systems that aren't connected to the API. They don't have a central, single source of truth of data. I mean, how important is that when you move into this next era where we can turn on these machines to act as our analysts and consultants? I mean, is that a critical step that they've got to get through?
The better your data, the better the future you. If there's exponential results that could be had, then you got to double down on data.
Okay.
It's critical.
So that is, and I'm glad that I asked this, Mike, because I have a CFO event that I'm speaking to the end of this month, a couple of hundred CFOs in that organization. And I know that's going to be the big question. What is the data readiness piece that I need to get? Because up to this point, I'll just hire somebody for $30,000 a year and she can pull the reports from the 6 different systems and do a VLOOKUP and I'll figure it out, but that era is coming to a close very quickly.
Yeah. Look, if you're not doing it, I bet your competitor is. Just like startups, everyone thinks their idea is very special and unique in their approach. Yeah. But there's somebody else out there in a garage or at the bar with a napkin or any of those things. You got to look at your whole competitive landscape and say, who's going to own this? But if you're the 3rd or 5th or 352nd person in your market, there are process engineering things that you can do to become an augmented enterprise from the entire customer development lifecycle and RevOps funnel all the way through to delivery and customer retention.
Yeah. I think it's funny. The the last few conversations I've had on this show, probably over the last 10 weeks or so, really heavily influenced the writing of this new book, Adapt Agility, because it talks about how in change management, and this is a lot of what we work with in the business that I'm in, a lot of the challenges of change management is the limbic system. You know, when you mention the word change, the human brain can't distinguish between a bear and an angry manager. Like they're the same thing. Right? So the limbic response is going to be fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And the limbic resonance and synchronization of the limbic systems of people inside the organization can be this great barrier to resistance. So I've been out a lot lately telling CEOs, you have got to start thinking about change management, and you cannot ignore this change management aspect, because if your culture doesn't become agile and open and adaptable to change in the near future, you're going to have a bad time, because the plans that you have laid last week are going to be irrelevant in 10 days. And that's going to be a real challenge and problem for your organization if you aren't prepared for it.
Change is the hardest part about all this. The technology isn't necessarily going to be hard. It's just, you're just, the biggest challenge there is building things in a modular way, because the model wars are on. We're going to have new models and forever as a result. But the change management piece is key. I mean, we use the change management accelerator process to really quickly dig in and get deep around what's going to happen. It's not part of the work that we do, but are you familiar with David Rock, Neuro Leadership Institute? No. Yeah, so he was an NLP trained person that went back to understand why the people he was coaching wouldn't necessarily stay on course; they would drift back. And so, at a fundamental neurophysiological level, he identified something called the SCARF: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And when someone's presented with a new situation, they immediately evaluate, how will it change my status? What's the certainty of this thing happening? If it happens, how autonomous will I be inside of that? How related is it to the world that I am in now, and how fair is it? So if you come to a leader and say, I'm going to partner your team up with AI because I want to double the output of your team. I know you can do it 3 times as fast, but I want to double the output of your team. And I want to make sure everyone has job satisfaction, work-life balance, feels appreciated and creative. Case number 1. Flip side, Derrick, you got 12 head count of 12. We're going to take it down to 3. Use AI, figure it out. So we just violated a number of things in the SCARF.
In the SCARF. Yeah. I love that SCARF method. I'd never heard that before. We use Kubler-Ross. We talk about, we have our own methodology that we call an adaptable method that we utilize, but I've never heard this. And I'm intrigued. I've got to go check it out. I always think it's interesting. And I mentioned this to people. The Kubler-Ross model is this curve that shows, the acceptance and all of these kind of things, how we deal with change. The other thing that Kubler-Ross did, which most people forget about, is the 5 stages of grief. And guess what? The curve is exactly the same. Kubler-Ross just literally photocopied it, whited out the one, and said, "Hey, I can sell this to two different versions." Because Kubler-Ross understood that from a biological perspective, when I say we're going to change your role, that means that somebody died. Like something died. There's a divergence. I have to allow something to get buried in the ground, and then I have to have something new come up from that. And that is not a cycle that we as human beings are designed to want to embrace. We all avoid death, at least most of us. And that's technically what this is trying to say, is that change gives us that same sort of feeling of death. And it's important for us to, it's one of the reasons, I dabble a lot with psychedelics and know a lot of people in the psychedelics world. And one of the things they say about trips is the best way to not have a bad trip is if you feel like you're dying, die. And just keep dying over and over in that trip. And you will have an amazing experience. The bad trip is fighting the death of the ego and not allowing yourself to be resurrected. I have one friend, he's been on a couple of different shows. He confided to me the other night, he believes he's died 1,700 times under the use of psychedelics. Right? And he's like, but every time I metamorphosize and I come back better, stronger. We've got to take that same approach to our business. Just because something is going to die doesn't mean that's a bad thing. Let's embrace the death and let's come out on the other side of that metamorphosized and augmented in a sense with this technology. All right. Thanks for joining me on that episode of The Convergence. Mike Hruska, love you, man. I can't wait for you to come back. This is so much fun. It's fun when you have a childhood friend that you meet again later in life and your paths cross and you find out that you've both been on sort of dynamic paths and they intersect in such a cool way. So thank you for joining me here on The Convergence. Listen, please check out a couple of things. Obviously, go and check out the past episodes. There's just incredible stuff in there on carbon credits and blockchain and DAOs. And we've literally world leaders that are in there that have given great interviews for this show. Second thing, check out the YouTube channel if you're listening to the podcast, or the podcast if you're listening to the YouTube channel so you don't miss anything. And third, I would love it if you would go check out my new book, Adapt Agility. It is available now on Amazon. I've got an audio version of it that's going to be coming out very close. You can get it on your Kindle. I did intentionally made it very inexpensive so that everybody can access it. You can buy multiple copies and share them. This is an interesting work of mine. Anybody who's familiar with my work, sometimes I talk a little bit more philosophically about business. Other times I like to write fictional stories about characters inside business to teach lessons. This one's hardcore research, information, theory, a little bit of a different thing for me, but I've got multiple books like this that'll be coming out. Adapt Agility, the word was created by ChatGPT. I fed it the manuscript and said, what should I name the book? And it came back and said, Adapt Agility, Overcoming Biological Resistance to Change. So thank you, ChatGPT, for naming this book. The book is interesting because I believe it helps you fundamentally understand why people resist change inside your organizations and why people resist change in society, why it's very difficult to throw out old models and replace them. We're biologically encoded. Evolution for millions of years has designed us, has guided us in a direction where our limbic system takes over when we face change. There is no difference to a human of a raging bear coming down the hallway or a manager with an upset look on their face. Both of those things result in a limbic, visceral response that will encourage actions and behaviors that are not beneficial to the organization. In my book, Adapt Agility, I specifically talk how to overcome that. And I give a little bit of a different change management framework and model that you may have never heard before. I've even talked to some change management experts that said, we don't need a new framework. And then they looked at mine and they said, yeah, not bad. So I'd like you to take a look at it, read it, tell me what you think. Please write a review on Amazon. I'm excited about the work. It came out really quickly. I've been working on this idea of evolution and how it has affected us and how it forms and changes, forms the world we see today and the reality that we live in. So I'd really appreciate your feedback on it. And until next time, I'm here on The Convergence.
Thanks for listening to The Convergence. If you want more information about the topics you've heard here today, reach out to us at theconvergencepodcast.com.